to red-brown. Godzilla had been gone for 9 years. After 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla, Toho put the character on the shelf entirely, and when he came back in 1984 for a film simply called The Return of Godzilla, everything about him was rebuilt to feel like a threat again, not a hero. The suit, now known to fans as the 84 Goji, borrowed features nobody had touched since the 1950s, 4 toes instead of 3, fangs, ears, a rough, textured underside on the tail, and staggered rows of dorsal plates pulled straight from the original 1954 and 1955 costumes. It was heavy too, nearly 240 pounds, close to 3 times the weight of the suits used in the 1970s, and every extra pound showed in how deliberately it moved. But the detail that mattered most was in the face. The eyes used a structure borrowed from the 1964 suits, red-brown irises set into a much larger visible white than any Godzilla before him had shown, and the effect read as suitably evil, not cartoonish, not sympathetic, just cold. This was a Godzilla built for the height of the Cold War, arriving in a film where the real fear wasn't a monster at all, but nuclear brinksmanship between 2 superpowers who might set him off by accident while trying to kill him. The upper lip could even curl into a snarl, a mechanical first for the character, and a 16-foot animatronic head nicknamed the Cybot handled the close-ups the rubber suit couldn't manage. Those red-brown eyes only appeared in this one film before the design moved on, but they did their job. They told an entire generation of returning fans that the friendlier, kid movie Godzilla of the 1970s was dead, and something colder and angrier had crawled out of the sea to replace him. Amber. 5 years later, those eyes changed shape, and that changed everything about how Godzilla read on screen going forward. The suit built for Godzilla vs. Biollante in 1989 was called the BioGoji, and it set the template for the rest of the Heisei era. The head was shrunk, the neck was stretched, and the face was rebuilt to look feline instead of reptilian. The real change was in the eyes. The irises were enlarged until they filled almost the entire socket. A deliberate choice meant to project mammalian cunning instead of animal blankness. This was not a lizard staring dumbly at a city. This was something that was thinking. The chest and thighs were built up with new musculature, the teeth doubled into 2 rows top and bottom, and the dorsal fins grew larger to match the heavier frame. When the same suit returned 2 years later for Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the body got even more massive, the face even more vicious, but those amber eyes stayed exactly the same. They were the one constant through half a decade of Godzilla getting bigger, meaner, and more dangerous, reused again for Godzilla vs. Mothra, for his fight with Battra at the bottom of the Pacific, for his emergence from an erupting Mount Fuji strong enough to survive miles of 1500-degree magma. Every future Heisei design owed its expression to this one decision. Suit actor Kenpachiro Satsuma wore the BioGoji for both of its outings, and the design became valuable enough off-screen that someone broke into Toho's special effects department in 1992 and stole one of the 2 BioGoji suits entirely, planning to use it for the studio's next film before it was eventually recovered. Where the 84 Goji's red-brown eyes had looked evil, Amber looked something closer to hungry. Amber was not fear. Amber was appetite, and appetite is a much scarier thing to put in front of a city that can't fight back. Red. 6 years after that, that same calculating gaze turned into something closer to agony. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah gave the king of monsters a body that was dying from the inside. A volcanic explosion on Birth Island triggered a runaway reaction in Godzilla's heart, which functions as a natural nuclear reactor. And as the temperature climbed toward meltdown, his skin split open into glowing, lava-colored wounds. To pull this off, the effects team gutted sections of the existing suit and packed nearly 200 tiny orange bulbs underneath translucent vinyl plating, wiring a thick power cable out through the tail to keep them lit. But it's the eyes that sell the horror. They stopped being calculating and started burning. An angry, uncontrolled red that made the animatronic head look genuinely out of its mind with pain. His blood shifted from red to orange to white as his internal temperature spiked past 1,000 degrees, and his spines began to glow and crack open, venting heat and radiation into the air around him. Instruments back at military headquarters clocked his internal temperature climbing past 1,100 degrees as the crisis peaked. The military's answer was freezing weapons, an entire arsenal of master cannons, the airborne Super X-3, and a specialized vessel called the Mayflower One, all built to cool him down before the meltdown could level the planet. It worked, but only barely, and only by killing him. When the radiation cleared, Godzilla's son absorbed what was left and grew into an adult overnight, inheriting his father's exact silhouette, but none of the meltdown that had defined his final hours. The red eyes belonged to a body in the process of ending. Godzilla had never looked more powerful, and he had never been closer to gone. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite Godzilla design. Let's get back into the video. Red and orange. 3 years later, on the other side of the Pacific, an entirely different studio put its own Godzilla in front of American audiences, and it barely resembled the character at all. TriStar's 1998 film reimagined Godzilla as a lean, fast, iguana-based creature designed by Patrick Tatopoulos, closer to a marine reptile outrunning a T-Rex than the upright, city-stomping icon Toho had built over 4 decades. That version died at the end of the film, but it left behind a nest of over 200 eggs, and one surviving offspring grew up fast in the animated sequel series that followed Godzilla the series. This second-generation Godzilla kept its father's slender, reptilian build, but swapped his cold coloring for something warmer, a desaturated purple hide that was originally planned to be a bright blue in early production art. The eyes told their own story on top of that, red with orange pupils, a combination nobody else in the franchise had used before or since. When this Godzilla charged its atomic fire breath, a green light would climb up the dorsal fins first, building in intensity, and only then would the eyes ignite to match, timing the glow so the audience always knew a blast was half a second away. It's easy to write this incarnation off as the black sheep of the family, and for years, plenty of fans did exactly that. But the animated series gave Godzilla something Toho's version rarely got in this era: a settled home in New York, a research team called H.E.A.T that trusted him instead of hunting him, and a scientist, Nick Tatopoulos, who had imprinted the creature on himself moments after it hatched and treated it less like a monster than like an animal under his protection. Those red and orange eyes were built specifically to be readable to a Saturday morning audience meeting the character for the first time, expressive enough to carry emotion across a cartoon frame in a way the slower, heavier Toho suits never needed to manage. White and black. 2 years after that, back in Japan, Toho decided to bring the King of Monsters back from the dead again, and this time they went looking for a design that split the difference between old and new. Godzilla 2000, Millennium introduced the Mechagodzilla, a suit heavily inspired by the classic 1962 look but finished in a natural, dark green. The first time in the character's history his skin had officially been painted anything other than charcoal gray. The dorsal plates were large and jagged with a purple tint, the head was thinner and more reptilian than any Heisei design, and the mouth carried a permanent trademark frown. But here's where it gets interesting. For the eyes, the designers reached backward instead of forward, giving this new Millennium Godzilla the exact same white with black pupils look that had defined the 84 Goji suit 16 years earlier in 1984. It was a strange, deliberate act of nostalgia buried inside a design that was trying so hard to look modern everywhere else. Compare that to what Toho would do with the character's eyes just 1 year later, and the contrast becomes the whole point. Mechagodzilla's eyes still had pupils in them. They were still, on some level, alive. Blank white. Because in 2001, Toho took that same idea and erased it completely. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Giant monsters all. Attack threw out every version of Godzilla that came before and replaced him with something worse. A body reanimated by the restless souls of soldiers killed during the Pacific War. Designer Fuyuki Shinada gave this Godzilla a lower, more horizontal stance, with the tail raised off the ground like a real predator instead of dragged behind him. But the detail that made audiences flinch was simpler than any of that. The eyes had no pupils at all, just flat, ghostly white, all the way through. There was nothing to read in them, no cunning, no pain, nothing that resembled a living creature looking back at you. That was the point. This Godzilla wasn't angry, it was possessed, a vessel built from the dead, coming ashore because the nation that killed them had chosen to forget what it had done to them. Every other Godzilla in the franchise has motives you can follow, even sympathize with. This one only has grievance. Decades later, when director Takashi Yamazaki built Godzilla -1, he named this film as one of his direct influences, right alongside the 1954 original. The blank white eyes weren't just a design choice. They were the moment Godzilla became a ghost story. yellow. 1 year later, Godzilla got his eyes back, and with them, an entirely new personality. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla in 2002 walked away from the possessed, undead version of the character entirely and returned to the more animal-like look of the BioGoji suit, but pushed the eyes in a direction nobody had tried before. Extremely large, rounded, and bird-like, glowing a bright, expressive yellow that made this Godzilla noticeably more readable, almost more alive, than any of his immediate predecessors. The head was rebuilt smaller and more reptilian, closer to the classic Heisei shape, with a more pronounced snout and the return of small, forward-facing ears. This incarnation, nicknamed Kiryu Goji, went on to fight the original 1954 Godzilla's own salvage skeleton, rebuilt by the JSDF into a biorobot called Kiryu, and armed with an absolute zero cannon capable of freezing an enemy down to the molecular level. Kiryu's suit actor, Tsutomu Kitagawa, played Godzilla in the same era, and the film's other nickname, Shakugoji, comes from actress Yumiko Shaku, who starred as Kiryu's pilot. This is the only Godzilla suit from the entire Millennium series to headline more than one film, returning virtually unchanged the following year for Godzilla. Tokyo SOS with nothing more than a scar added to the chest, sustained from Kiryu's own weapon. Those wide yellow eyes proved popular enough that Toho leaned on this exact design for the franchise's 60th anniversary logo in 2014, more than a decade after the suit itself had been retired. Where GMK's white eyes had erased the character's inner life completely, Kiryu Goji's yellow eyes did the opposite. They gave Godzilla back his curiosity. Blue. 12 years after that, the eyes started to glow for the first time. Legendary's Monsterverse, beginning with 2014's Godzilla, gave the character natural brown-amber irises with a faintly yellow sclera under normal conditions, closer to an animal's eyes than anything since the Heisei era. But charge up the atomic breath, and that calm brown color gets overtaken by a spreading blue light radiating out through the eyes, the gills, and the dorsal plates as the beam builds. In Godzilla, King of the Monsters, that blue glow was reserved for moments of real threat, a warning shot before the actual shot. By Godzilla vs. Kong, he'd started glowing blue almost constantly, whether he was about to fire or not, a walking display of dominance rather than a genuine countdown. Blue doesn't mean anger here, and it doesn't mean death. It means the king is making sure everyone in the room remembers who's in charge, whether or not he plans to prove it. Small and white. 2 years after Godzilla first glowed blue in America, Toho reimagined him one more time back home, and his eyes got smaller instead of brighter, which somehow made them harder to look at. Shin Godzilla reframed the creature as something closer to an organism mutating in real time, and its most advanced form has a head with no cheeks, no lips, jagged teeth that push in and out of the skin around its mouth, and eyes reduced to tiny, seemingly lidless white dots. They're protected by a brill, a transparent membrane strong enough to survive a direct bomb blast without damage. For most of the film, Godzilla sits frozen and statue-like in this form, immobile, while it silently rebuilds its energy over roughly 15 days. But it doesn't always wait out the clock. Once it stores enough power, its skin begins to glow red at the seams, and those small white eyes snap open, sometimes before recovery is even finished. The horror here isn't rage or possession. It's evolution happening faster than anyone can stop it. A creature so busy becoming something else that eyes are almost an afterthought bolted onto the design. Where GMK's white eyes told you a soul was inside, Shin Godzilla's tiny white eyes told you there might not be room for a soul at all. Blue, but gentle. 1 year after that, Godzilla stopped being a threat you could measure in feet and became something closer to a force of nature entirely, and the eyes softened to match. Godzilla. Planet of the Monsters, the first film in Toho's 2017 anime trilogy, introduced Godzilla Earth, a version of the character that had spent 20,000 years evolving unchecked after humanity abandoned the planet, growing into the tallest Godzilla ever put on screen at over 300 meters, taller than Shin Godzilla's final form and taller than anything Legendary's Monsterverse has produced. Co-director Hiroyuki Sashita gave art director Mitsunori Katama one specific instruction for the design. Don't make him a ferocious reptile, make him a dignified god instead. To pull that off, most of the attention went to the eyes, which were given actual eyelashes and a calm, blazing blue color, soft enough that Seishida half-joked they ended up looking like cat eyes on a 300-meter kaiju. It's a strange choice for a character the story treats as an unbeatable, planet-dominating apex predator that humanity spent 30 years failing to kill. And that's exactly why it works. Every other incarnation on this list uses its eyes to signal aggression, damage, or possession. Godzilla Earth's blue eyes signal none of that. They signal that he has already won and stopped caring enough to be angry about it. Interestingly, a promotional statue built for the film's release gave Godzilla Earth green eyes instead of blue, and an earlier flashback sequence inside the film itself shows a younger version of the character with glowing yellow-white eyes over a more muted design. But the blue, gentle, and unblinking is the one that defines him across all three films in the trilogy. Tabatsu's orange thumb, back in the Monsterverse, Godzilla's blue glow has an angrier cousin, and it first showed up during the climactic battle against Ghidorah in Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Pushed to his absolute limit and drawing on power he shouldn't survive tapping, Godzilla enters a thermonuclear state, with orange and red cracks spreading across his hide like a fault line about to give way. When he charges a nuclear pulse in this state, rather than his standard beam, his eyes glow orange instead of blue, matching the fractures running across his skin. This isn't a stronger version of the same dominance display he uses elsewhere. It's Godzilla redlining, pulling on reserves that are visibly hurting him just to put out. The same way burning Godzilla's red eyes signaled a body eating itself alive decades earlier in a completely different continuity on a completely different side of the world. Two studios, 4 decades apart, kept reaching for the exact same idea without coordinating a single frame of it. When Godzilla's own power starts to become the danger, the eyes turn to fire. Gold. Godzilla. -1 gave the character its most human eyes and its most inhuman detail at the same time. Director Takashi Yamazaki and his design team built the face as a composite of features pulled from across the franchise's 70-year history, but the eyes were something new. A golden, almond shape, warmer than anything that came before it. And then they made one decision that turned warmth into dread. The eyes never blink. Not once in the entire film. The entire creature was built digitally rather than as a practical suit, a choice that let the team push the scale detail and skin texture far past what any physical costume could hold, all completed by a team of only 35 artists across 610 visual effects shots, on a production budget so small compared to Hollywood blockbusters that its eventual Academy Award nomination for visual effects stunned the industry. A predator that doesn't need to blink, doesn't need to rest, doesn't need to look away, doesn't process a threat the way something mortal would. But here's where it gets interesting. By the film's climax, that gold is gone. After Godzilla survives a rapid decompression attack during Operation Watatsumi, his body is left cracked and frozen, patches of pale white scarring spreading across his skin, and his eyes are shown burst from their sockets and frosted over, reading as a damaged pale hazel instead of gold. His dorsal fins and the deep cracks in his skin glow blue as he charges one final heat ray, the exact same warning color the Monsterverse had introduced 9 years earlier, on the opposite side of the Pacific, in a continuity that shares nothing else with this one. The unblinking predator that opened the film ends it wounded, frozen, and for the first time, looking almost mortal. Gold was confidence. What replaced it was proof that even Godzilla can be hurt. Magenta. And then there is the evolved form Godzilla takes on in Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire, and he changes the meaning of every color that came before him. His torso slims, his arms grow long and muscular with translucent spikes running down the forearms, and his tail ends in 4 blade-like thagomizers. His atomic breath turns magenta, and so do his eyes along with every dorsal plate and spike on his body, all lighting up in unison when he charges. The design deliberately calls back to 2 of Toho's most divisive eras, the green-skinned Godzilla 2000 and Godzilla vs. Megaguirus suits from the turn of the Millennium filtered through a modern glow effect that makes his whole body look like a single circuit coming online. His new pink dorsal spines and skin-deep bioluminescence give him an unmistakable resemblance to that same Mechagoji design from 24 years earlier. And the filmmakers have confirmed the pink power-up glow itself was directly inspired by the Kaio-ken technique from Dragon Ball, a burst of borrowed strength that comes with a cost attached. This is Godzilla at his most powerful and least familiar, a version built specifically to output more raw force than anything that came before it. Red-brown menace, an amber appetite, and burning red agony, and TriStar's orange-pupiled curiosity, and Mechagoji's borrowed nostalgia, and GMK's ghostly blank white, and Kiryu Goji's bird-like yellow and dominant blue, and Godzilla Earth's gentle, dignified calm and thermonuclear orange, and unblinking gold, 70 years and 13 eye colors, all replaced in an instant by one unified color blazing across his entire silhouette. Which color do you think suits the King of the Monsters best? Drop it in the comments.